Now I'm going to hand this over to Sara Edwards and Julia Bowman. They will be leading our webinar today. So Sara, Julia, take it away.
Hello and welcome. I'm Julia Bowman. I am one of the birth to 3 teachers at Illinois School for the Visually Impaired, and I also happen to be the mother of a teenage daughter who has severe visual impairments and multiple disabilities.
And I am Sara Edwards. I'm the other half of the Birth to 3 program at the Illinois School for the Visually Impaired. Julia and I have worked together for about 10, 11 years now in the Birth to 3 program. And like Julia, I am the parent of children who have vision loss. I have 2 children, 18 and almost 16, and they both have Leber's congenital amaurosis. So today, before we get started, I just wanted to touch on a couple housekeeping items. We are going to share in the chat room a calendar of events through the Illinois Department of Human Services. It has all of the webinars that Julia and I are doing through ISVI and then also partnered through APH. So we do approximately 2 webinars a month. And there is a calendar of events that will show you the dates, the times, and the topics that we are looking to present on those times. Then we also want to share a link to some of the webinars that have been previously recorded. So you can go back and look at those if you were not able to attend during those times. And also we want to share Michelle Clark's email address. If you are an Illinois provider and are seeking early intervention or PD credit and you watch any of these webinars or recorded webinars, you can email her and she will be able to provide you with a certificate for EI and or PD credit. So we'll make sure that those 3 sources are in the chat for you as well. Lastly, before I turn it back to Julia, Julia and I will be monitoring the chat today for any questions, and we will be able to relay those to the panelists so they can ask. So if you have any specific questions or want our panelists to talk about anything specific as far as switching hats, going from the classroom to the home, please put those in the chat and we will make sure those get touched on.
Okay, so Sara and I have a lot of experience switching hats or changing roles back and forth from parent to teacher. And our children have been in both early intervention and in school-based services. So we know that those 2 roles well, but what we don't have experience with is switching hats between providing school-based services and providing birth to 3 services. So we invited 3 of our colleagues who have a great deal of experience at exactly this, that switching roles, switching hats between school-based services and birth to 3 services. And we'll let them introduce themselves in a few minutes. But we just wanted to say that the goal of this roundtable is to highlight the differences between birth to 3 and school-age services. And I saw we don't have any parents on here. That was one of our goals, was to help parents to understand better. But we really just want to give an educator's perspective. So if there are any of you on here who have a caseload of school-age children and you're thinking about taking on a caseload of babies, infants, and toddlers, we just wanted to give you a realistic snapshot of what that's like so that can prepare you for what changes might need to happen for you to enter that part of our field. So with that, we'll start by having our panel introduce themselves, and just if you could just tell, how long you have been in the field of visual impairments and how long you've provided school-based services and how long you've provided early intervention services. And why don't you go first, Carol?
My name is Carol Otten. I am a TVI and an orientation mobility specialist, but for the last 35 years, I was an orientation mobility specialist strictly in school-based programming. I retired in June of this year from my school job, but I have also been providing orientation mobility in Illinois. It's called developmental therapy, orientation mobility. And as we talked last week, prior to the seminar, I actually started providing it probably in the late 90s when our school districts had us go into the homes of if you had a child that lived in the school district. Since then, many years ago in Illinois, we provided a different format, and now early intervention is not provided, obviously, through the school. So I have been doing early intervention with little children probably since the mid 90s. And so I've had a lot of experience switching hats.
Okay, Samantha, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Samantha Zonner. I've been a TVI for 8 years in the Illinois public schools, and then I've been a developmental therapist of vision in the early intervention program for 4 years. So kind of new, I guess.
Okay, Denise, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Denise Klauser. I have been working in the schools as a TVI and O&M specialist for 19 years, but I am the newbie to EI, and I've been working as a DTV and DTO&M for 1 year.
Okay, great. So Sara and I were just going to start off with some basic questions just to get the ball rolling. And then we hope that you'll join in the chat and ask some more specific questions to our panelists. So first, I would like the panelists to share what their schedule looks like in both a typical day and a typical week. And we can just keep our same order. Carol, you can go first.
Sure. So prior to my retirement from school job, I provided services to families either after school or honestly, more realistically on weekends. And when you look at the difference maybe between orientation mobility and then the developmental therapy vision, I was doing with some of my older, like 2 to 3 year olds, I was doing a lot more services of outside of their home environment. So it was actually easier for the families as well as myself to probably meet on a weekend. And we would normally choose a location, convenient to their home.
Okay, Samantha.
All right, so my schedule is crazy. I have certain students that are weekly, so then I usually set up a day, and it's typically like a Saturday morning or a Sunday for my weekly students. My bi-weekly students are once a month. It really just depends on the family. So it could be any day the family sends me a text message saying, this month we want to see you on the 16th at 6 o'clock at night. I typically, since I work in the schools, I do after school hours, Monday through Friday or the weekend. And it just all depends. I can't say like I never work on a Sunday because I work whenever.
Okay, Denise, how about you?
Mine's similar to Samantha's and Carol's. I mostly do weekend mornings on Saturdays, but I do evenings as well. Most often the latest is, like a 5 o'clock start because families are busy with their other kids, or it's just, close to nap or bedtime. So yeah, it's like 6 to 7 days a week you're working if you work full time at your school, and then, 1 or 2 kids on the weekends.
Okay, so go ahead, Sara.
Well, I was just going to extend off of that. So obviously, since you work in the school, you see the kids either in the evenings or the weekends. So have you found it to be a challenge, if you come across a family that maybe is not open to, having you provide service during those times? Is how do you go about that?
No, I would say honestly, because, and I don't know how this is across the world, but our providers in Illinois, we don't have enough providers. And so when a family knows that I'm available, they're pretty flexible because they want the service. So I would say that I haven't had too many issues. And the thing I was going to mention before was then during the summer, like Samantha and Denise, because we're teachers, our availability is a little bit easier in the summer. And again, for some of what our services are, maybe between April and October, it's easier for us to be outside for our services. And so I think, most of the families are pretty flexible, at least as far as my experience goes.
So do you limit, I guess, like, do you set a number of students that you want to see in EI? Because obviously in the school, you can't necessarily say I'm only seeing 3 kids, right? You have to see however many are in that school district, but you can set your limit in EI. So do each of you have like a number that you only see through early intervention?
I'll jump in on that one. So I initially did, when I first started out, I was like, I am only taking 3 kids. But then you would get like these messages from service coordinators and they're like, there's this baby, the family needs you. And I'm a sucker and a pushover. And I'd be like, okay. So the highest I've had at one time working full time was also 9 in EI. And when I was picking up those kids at the end, I was very honest. I will see you on Saturday or I will see you on Sunday. It has to be the weekend. And I would see kids back to back. I was very lucky that 5 of them were all in a really close radius of one another at one point. But yeah, I mean, I'm just a sucker. So a service coordinator is going to reach out to you, say this baby needs you, and how are you going to say no to a baby?
Yeah. So
Yeah, I did not have the, I really didn't ever have to turn families away. I think Samantha, as all of us in our field, we love our jobs. We're passionate about what we do. I have the flexibility with being a little bit older and my family doesn't need me around as much. So I am always willing to be available if I could be of service.
Being new to the field of EI, I decided to do 4 at the maximum right now. Working full time, I felt that that was just enough for me. Right now, currently though, I only have 2 because I had 2 kids age out. But I'm willing to do 4 at a time. But recently I've just stayed with 2 just because of family things that going on currently and virtual learning and the whole change of this world. But I'm comfortable with 4. I thought that was a good number for me.
Good.
well, it looks like we have a question in the chat already. So I'm going to go ahead and read that. It says, we have historically, for at least 40 years, had a model where 0 to 5 is separate from 6 to 21, with a little overlap when it made sense for a family or a team. This had helped immensely with not having to switch hats so drastically, not having to be an expert in everything, which is impossible, of course. It looks like we are heading to a different model where we all have everyone and are a little concerned. Are there resources that talk about pros and cons of this, or is it pretty much anecdotal? Can I ask you, Cindy, can you share what state you're from? Because I think it's different. Carol, you can talk a little bit about how it used to be where you had the same babies, but as far as I know, in a lot of our state, that birth to 3 is separate from
She's
everyone
in
else.
Connecticut.
Okay.
She's
Okay.
in Connecticut.
Yeah, so when we were doing it by school district, I was the only orientation mobility specialist at the time anyway in my co-op. We serviced probably 15 different school districts, and so I was itinerant among the schools as well as I would be among the families. I'm thinking that if you belong to a co-op where there are more of you and some of you might have more experience with younger ones, there might be a way that you could, change your caseload by what your experiences are or by geographic area, things like that. But I felt that initially, I probably had the least amount of experience working with babies. I found that I paired up with our family educator at the time. Each school district had like a birth to 3 educator that didn't go to schools. And I spent a lot of time with that person, mentoring and just getting a feel for what it's like to be in a family home versus a school environment.
She did mention, Cindy did mention that her state agency serves all of 0 to 3. I think it's very similar, maybe Arizona or in Texas. I think Texas does that too, I believe. I think when you're certified in Texas, you're certified from 0 to 21. Could be wrong.
Okay, well, maybe
Yes,
this
I was when I was, but I don't know if it's changed because it's been a long time.
Right.
And some certifications are lifetime and some are not. So, but yeah, because I'm from Texas, obviously. I say obviously, you all know, not the
Yes.
audience. But
Massachusetts was like that when I had my
Yeah.
license there. I
Yeah.
could see anyone at any age, all the way
Mhm.
0 to 21. It's
Yep.
different in Illinois though.
Oh yeah, yes it is.
But maybe it would help if we moved on to the next topic I had on my list, is just telling us about what you think is either the most surprising thing about switching hats or just the greatest difference between those 2 roles. So whoever wants to start.
I can
I
start.
almost want to go to Denise because you're the newest. Like, what was the most surprising thing? You went through a program where you learned about birth to 3 services, and we tried to share some of our experiences. But when you actually got in there in the homes, what was surprising to you?
Oh, gosh. Well, it's definitely a different model. We're looking at a family, empowering the family and the parents. So it's more of a coaching model than direct, you're still working with the child directly, but it's more like your role release to the family and trying to empower the family to teach in their children with vision impairments. So I guess that was a different mindset you had to go into, knowing that you weren't going to take this little baby, and be able to hold it and play with it all on your own. And you're more teaching the family and then also encouraging the siblings and working with siblings to interact with their new sibling who is blind or visually impaired. That was a new thing for me because coming from a school setting, it's usually a one-on-one situation. Maybe it's a pull-out situation where you're just with the student, or you're pushing into a classroom, but you're still kind of just with the student, maybe encouraging the other students in the classroom to interact with your student. But it's definitely a different mindset and going in there. And they told us in class when we went through the program, but until you actually do it, it's a little bit different. So, but I enjoy it. I love it. I see the difference that we can make in the homes and how it's so beneficial to be in the homes.
Jump in next. I think one of the things was how welcoming, like, not that our school age parents and families aren't welcoming of us, but it's a different type of welcoming when you're working in early intervention. So I have one family where they included me. They called me like Aunt Sammy because I was there from pretty much this daughter's birth up until she turned 3. So like, oh, Aunt Sammy's here. And like the grandma knew me, the aunts and uncles came in for a session. So you met the whole family and they took you in as one of their own. Whereas in schools, there's that professional like boundary where like, oh, you're Mrs. Zahner. Oh, and like, it's not that they're not nice and welcoming of you, but it's a different, you're almost one of their family members when you're in there at birth to 3. Whereas at school, you definitely feel that divide of, we may be close to you and you're someone who works with a child for multiple years, but it's not that same bond, I would say.
Yeah, and really following up with that with Samantha, when we go into the homes in birth to 3 and the parents with children that age they don't have a lot of knowledge, they don't have a lot of experiences. They may not know another person who has a visual impairment. And so they really look to us for so much. I mean, for comfort, for information, to be a resource. And when they come to school, even at 3 or 5, or, some even a little bit older, if they've moved to a new community, they've already had some experience. They've maybe had some acceptance with the visual impairment. They understand what orientation mobility is, and they're expecting what you're going to be doing. One of the other things that I mentioned last week with the group is that I found that working with a team with early intervention was much different than working as a team in the schools. Not as good. So when you're in a school district and you have a team and you run across the vision teacher or the physical therapist, you see us in passing, we might have a meeting together, we may share students. And some of that is the same in Illinois, but I have found that where I live, and I live in Cook County, which is one of the largest counties near Chicago, I don't continuously work with the same therapist, whether it be a speech or a vision or a physical therapist. And so I really have to reach out to the other team members to follow up, because we really only have to meet every 6 months. And so if I don't follow up, or if the physical therapist doesn't have questions, we might not hear from somebody for 6 months. And I don't like that feeling, because I feel like one of my assets is being a valuable team member.
It looks like we had some comments on the chat just about service delivery and being able, some providers in Texas are being able to see students during the day. So I'm very happy for you that you're able to do that. But since you do have that experience, the 2 attendees who shared that, Elizabeth and Linda, could you also share, some of your input on this same topic in the chat about what you think are the greatest differences in your 2 roles? We can look at that. But we
I
can
think since we're in the middle, and I'll just kind of bounce off of what Carol, and you guys can expand any thoughts too. When you're talking about a team, just like we had talked about last week and how our team changes, and we can very well, I mean, we talked about how sometimes we're on cases and we've never even met maybe the PT or the OT. I mean, never had any communication with them. And as far as like co-treating though, that's different too, right? I mean, possibly more or less opportunities to co-treat in EI if you have, you know, that connection.
I'll jump off of that, Sarah, and that's true. I co-treat with my OT. So in my area, I'm in Kane, Kendall County, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere of Illinois. But we work in the same.
Oh, no. We'll argue about that.
In my neck of the woods, we're considered in the middle of nowhere. But I work with the same OT, I work with the same DT, the same PT. So we do travel in like a cluster because we used to be known as the blackout zone where there was no services. So now we have the same providers that come in and we pretty much hit every family in our area. So we get to work together, and we actually have it where, like this past weekend, I collaborated. We did a 3 combo co-treat. I had OT, DT, and myself. Next weekend, I'm meeting with just the PT and myself. So we have a schedule within ourselves, and we in the family say that they're open to it. So we get to do more co-treat, at least in my role, I do out here than I do in my teaching role.
And I think that depends on the experiences of the other therapists. So if I have a physical, I mean, I reach out to the physical therapist whenever I pick up a new student. And I would say that almost always the physical therapist is willing to co-treat and they look forward to it. Again, with visual impairment being so low incidence, you can meet a physical therapist for the first time who doesn't have any experience, and they really are interested in what it is that we do, whether it's a vision or an O&M situation. And so there is that. But I would say maybe other therapists, you know, again, like we have nutrition people, we have social workers. It isn't often that I get to meet with all of them. And I do miss that part of the job.
Well, you mentioned, Carol, we are the shortage of, you know, providers who do vision services. And so sometimes, like Sarah and I, we are spread out. And so we have many teams and coordinating that many schedules to try and co-treat. So what I was actually going to ask is, have any of you found it easier with the availability of live video visit to meet some of your other team members?
Absolutely, yes. And our assessments, I mean, so many of our assessments, there could be 2 or 3 of us at a time, which again, that doesn't ever happen. And sometimes it's not allowed. You know, I think we've eased up on the restrictions. And so it's been a lot better for all of us to be able to be in on a session. I mean, currently, I think, Samantha, too, right, that you can't have more than 1 therapist in the home during a session. So even last week when I did an assessment, the PT was there and I was virtual, and that is a beautiful thing.
And how does that help you, Denise? You know, as far as, are you able to co-treat? Have you been able to co-treat, you know, as being a self-proclaimed newbie, you know, in EI, you know, do you find that helpful to co-treat with other?
Actually, yeah, so I've co-treated with, I have 2 families right now. So both families I've co-treated with the physical therapist quite a bit. So I do in-person visits with these 2 families. And so then the PT will do the live video visit. So it helps for me, we're both learning, you know, with how to facilitate movement with babies, you know, from a physical standpoint, physical therapy standpoint, and then also from a vision standpoint, I can help them and give them ideas on how to get the baby to move with, you know, vision loss and what types of things that we look for and how we can encourage and what strategies. So it really does work out well. But I also wanted to say the experience I've had prior to this in the last year is many times families don't want to have co-treating as a regular thing. They want those 4 services every single week to come in. So it is the parent's choice on that. So I always make sure that they know, you know, we ask in advance, and if it's just 1 time a week or 1 time a month, I'm sorry, or twice a month, then they're comfortable with that.
But I think it's, and I agree, I 100% with you. But I think it's important to think about too, because you guys are in the schools, and how often do you work closely with the PT in the schools and learn about, excuse me, and learn about those movements, or how often are you able to collaborate, with the other professionals in the school and talk about vision strategies so that those get followed through, other than the IEP. I don't know, because obviously we're not in the schools, but I think, that is a huge, significant difference. But, having to go from the school to the EI program where the collaboration and communication is quite different, I think, with the team members.
Schools, I find that depending on like if I have a student who might be in a program, self-contained special education program, maybe with multiple disabilities, we have more teaming options because there's so many different providers, different professionals in there. And just by the nature of the program, we have a set team meeting. But other than that, if it's a student I have that I'm case manager for, academic student, visual impairments, the only eligibility, maybe it's a PT or an OT, I find I have to reach out to them. We don't have a set team time necessarily, but that's just my district.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's pretty common. I would follow, and I would say that too, that sometimes we have scheduled team meetings for our self-contained classrooms, and it's easier to get in touch with those therapists. And my point, being an orientation mobility specialist, I certainly can say that I've worked closely with PTs all through the school districts. And so I find that I learned so much from them, whether it's in early intervention or in schools. And so that is something that I think I've always done.
Mm-hmm. Looks like we have a couple comments or questions, Julia.
Yeah. Just talking about when you're a provider, if you had a baby that you can transition into your own school program, that would make that a lot smoother. I wish we could co-treat more often with PT. Yes, we understand this. Especially with positioning. I agree completely with that the PTs can be so helpful with positioning. So we do, at least I know for Sara and I, we try to take advantage of that as much as possible. It is more difficult to get to do in EI. Let's see, what else do we have here? Just saying transition generally goes better if you have a history with the student and the family. And I would agree with that too. And that kind of goes back to that relationship, right? So you have that relationship of, being almost one of the family, and then you can help that family move through that transition into school-based service. You're that anchor. You're that same person if you can do both.
Well, and then that obviously is going to lead to a stronger relationship, right? Than somebody that you just start with in school, because you've already formed that relationship with the family. Whereas if, somebody comes in at 6 years old and you didn't have the history, I mean, that would definitely impact how that communication with the family is going to work.
Well, I was going to say too, I think it depends on the therapist. Samantha and I and Denise, I mean, we have a lot of experience in our jobs, and we have transitioned so many students. We're pretty outgoing personalities. And so I think if I reach out, as soon as I have if I have a 2-year-old or a 2.5-year-old, and I'm not the mobility person in that family's district or school district, I'm already in contact with them, letting them know, offering for them as it gets a little bit closer to come and watch one of my EI sessions. I mean, we haven't been able to do that during COVID, but certainly before this, that was one strategy for myself, because I thought it would be nice for the family to have that comfort level of knowing that there is another person that will follow in terms of orientation mobility, and having that family meet the person with me sometimes is a little bit more comforting for the family. And then nice for the O&M specialist to say, oh, hey, let's see what you're doing and why are you doing this? Not everybody does do that, but I certainly do.
I do the same for my area. Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not able to have them come in and observe, I definitely offer like a phone call and say, I'll call you in at the end of our session so we can all talk together. I find that it's really comforting to parents too, to say, oh, I know the next TVI. Your next TVI's name is Amber, right? Or so-and-so, and I've worked with them before. And then you see like the tension relieve the body, because I think a lot of parents too, like they tell me at the end when the child's transition away from me, I feel like we're losing you. I'm like, you're not losing me. I'm still going to be available to you. You can still contact me. And there's other people besides me, and everybody has different strengths and weaknesses. So I always kind of talk up the other person they're getting to, just so that it makes it easier to build that trusting relationship too.
Mhm.
Yep. We're getting more of the same kind of comments that transition is smoother if even just the vision professional can stay with them. If everybody else goes away, and then collaboration, just more support for collaboration with all of the different disciplines.
I have a question for you guys. As far as lesson planning, you know, when you have the students in the school, you know, whether it's academic or life skills, you have your IEP goals and what you're working on, and probably some pretty definite plans. I understand you might walk in someday and the kiddo's not feeling well, and maybe you have to, you know, change up what you do. But walking into a home in EI can completely, you might have to come in with 5 different ideas, because sometimes you just don't know what you're walking into that day. So how, you know, again, going from, you know, a teacher in the schools to a teacher in the homes, how do you lesson plan, and how is that different for you guys?
I think with early intervention, I'll always say, like, so it's always like the first time coming into the home, it's always like, oh, I have no idea. Like, I just base off of what the family wants, right? So the first one is totally flying by the seat of your pants. After that, I'll always say, okay, this is what we're doing this time. And I'll ask them, like, what are some new concerns? What are some areas you want to work on? And then I'll say, oh, okay, I have an idea for that. And I'll be able to make something potentially and bring it next time. So there's always like a little bit of a plan, but then there's sometimes when the parents are like, oh, we're so worried about feeding and, you know, mealtime, and you work on that and you come in the next day like, oh, they're a terror at bath time. So I always bring a bag. I know it's like, you're not supposed to anymore, but I always have a bag full of stuff, because we always get hit with, oh, well, actually, I'm not really concerned about that. We can talk about that next time, but what about bath time? What about wake up routine? Or what about this? And I always want to have different materials that I could like attach to a spoon, or a floating lighting little duck that can go in bath time that gives them something to visually fixate to. So really always having like a craft bin almost with you, and being flexible, and really half the time it's really flying by the seat of your pants, because the parents will change their mind sometimes even in the middle of the session, say, actually, now I remember it, my husband said that this is a problem, and then you go off of that.
And oftentimes the child isn't in the mood. I mean, that's another difference between school age and early intervention, where I would say, you know, in early intervention, there's been so many times when I've come to the home or I've met the family at a playground, and that 2-year-old or new walker is just not going to have this today. And so you have to let the child sort of, you know, we're letting the toddler or the child kind of run the session, because I don't want the child to cry and get upset if I'm going to meet them again in 2 weeks and they don't see me as often as I do with my regular ed school kids. I want, you know, they don't see me as often perhaps, so I don't want them to be upset when they see me again. And so not that you don't have a lesson plan, but flexibility, of course. And then looking at what's going to make the child happy, whether you're changing your song every 30 seconds or you're changing their activity. I mean, you just have to be open and flexible that maybe what you went in with today isn't going to work. But I think the bottom line is that it's for the parent at that point really loves the conversation, the communication, even if that day the child isn't getting a lot out of it, the parents certainly are, or the caregiver.
I would agree. I have a similar situation just like arose where the family, where their mom said, well, I'm sorry he didn't do so much for you today. And I said, oh, no, that's not why I'm here. You know, he was part of your routine, and that routine that he wanted to focus on that day was doing laundry with his mom, where she had the wash machine going, and and inside the dryer, he knows there's a little light, and he has light perception. So he likes to look at that light. But I said, go ahead and, let him be part of that routine. I'm fine. This is really good. And she took over the routine, which is what we want them to do, is to feel comfortable and empowered that we can treat our child so many different concepts and so many different things about life in that daily routine. And so I think I agree with Carol and Samantha that sometimes it's just, if a 2-year-old doesn't want to do anything, you're not going to get that 2-year-old to do what you want them to do. So I follow the 2-year-old, and I work in what I want them to learn based on what he wants to do. So whether it's climbing upstairs, and we talk about up and down, talk about sideways, forward, backwards, there's so many things that you can do in each daily routine that I don't have that planned out specifically. I just have the back of my mind, the big picture of what I want that child to work on that day.
And then that models for the parents how they can take any routine and make it a teaching moment, right?
Right.
Yes.
Wonderful.
So we have a comment from Teresa. She's in Alabama, and she said that they have been told that they are not allowed to have a lesson plan. It's very much family led and not about our agenda. We have transitioned to routine based home visits. So I think many of us go in with some ideas, not necessarily, I don't know if I would even call mine lesson plans.
Well, we can move to that topic of IEP development versus IFSP development, because if I would say I have a lesson plan for myself, it's based on the IFSP outcomes. So these are things the family has said that they want to work on. So that's what I'm aiming for. But like Denise said, I will get it however I can get it with that child. But why don't we take a few moments and talk about that, about how you even develop that plan for children in the schools versus in the homes. Whoever wants.
Why don't one of you guys start? Because I feel like I always come on after the vision person is already there, and so I think it's a little bit different.
Well, in Illinois, you need to be an evaluator to have vision TV services on the IFSP. So I am not an evaluator since I am new to EI. So I often will inherit, well, I actually will inherit from Sara, the child that she has evaluated in the family. So I base my lesson plans based on the goal that she had developed with the family and with the team. So in that IFSP, the goal is it's a family goal, what they want for their child. And it's routine based. Often, if they want their child to move in the environment so that they can play or they can interact with family members or whatever. So that will be the overall outcome that the family is looking for. And then there's strategies that are listed and how to achieve that, different ways you can encourage that. So there's not like benchmarks, like with an IEP, you'd have a goal, then you have a benchmark, and you're going to achieve these benchmarks, by the time the next annual review occurs. There is, an annual meeting and a 6-month, as Carol, I think, alluded to earlier, but we don't have the benchmarks in an IFSP. It's the strategies and how to work towards those.
So I would say too that when I write the IFSP goal with the family, I of course look at what the physical therapist has already written, because most of the time the child that I inherit or I've just done an assessment on for O&M has already been receiving physical therapy. And so we look at all the goals, because there's usually, how we have in school districts, there's an OT goal, a PT goal. There are similar characteristics of the IFSP. They aren't as specific as Denise mentioned. We don't have the benchmarks, but the strategies are what are important. And that's what the other therapists are also going to incorporate maybe into their lessons. So when I jump on board, I'm looking at what the other goals are, and then I'm going to add another goal that is going to focus on more specific orientation mobility skills, maybe using their vision. But if the DTV already has a vision goal, then I'm going to say, well, let's put some DTO&M onto that vision goal, and then let's add a new goal. And so they are not as specific. They're very open. There's no data collection, but at the end of our annual meeting, we look at what the outcomes are, and certainly flexible to change in any way that we need to.
we had a comment from Cindy. Let me open this up so I can read it better. She said our 0 to 3 in Connecticut has definitely moved to routine-based IFSP and visits. This is so interesting to me. I'm really glad you guys are sharing this information, just how our states are different. She says, but I still feel I need to have plans for what I'm looking for in terms of skills and next steps, what modifications or materials or strategies will help. Always family focused, of course, much different than lessons even for a 5-year-old. I completely agree. I mean, we are right on the same page. Then we also had Luis. As a paraprofessional in California, I usually observe the lessons that are being taught in the classroom. Then I adapt or lay the accessibility or VI concept over the lesson plans. When in the playground, I let the students do what they wish, keeping tabs on what activity needs to be changed. So in both of these, it's about the modifications. It's about the strategies, that are specific to visual impairment, I would say. Would you guys agree that that's a big part of what we're doing?
Yes.
So when we're talking about the goals or the outcomes, what the difference is about creating those goals, creating outcomes on an IFSP versus creating goals on an IEP. One's supposed to be family focused and one's supposed to be educationally focused. So thoughts on that and how that's different for you? Because the reason I ask this, and I'm probably not alone, is I've sat in many, many meetings where the question is like, okay, so what does vision want to work on? Or what does physical therapy want to work on? And the professionals get asked directly. When I'm in the meeting, I always turn that and I always say, well, Mom, what would you like to see, Billy work on in this area? Since it is supposed to be family driven, I do always ask the family if the service coordinator does not. So there's that difference, I think.
And is that ever hard for you? I mean, because it is family's priorities. It's not what you, right? If you were looking at your assessment, here are the logical next steps for this child, and that is nowhere near what the family wants to work on. How does that, how does that make you feel? How do you deal with that?
I feel like a lot of that is with your communication with the families too. So like I'm a very open person with my families, and I'll tell them, like, if I know, like my one student, he was totally blind, no light perception. And I was very honest at a young age, he will be a braille reader. And so I told the family, since we know he's going down this path, we need to work on tactual skills. We need to work on his hearing skills and other needs. And so I give that information while we're working on other content. And almost always then the family, if they're really participating in our session, you'll see that turn around in the IFSP where the mom will say, I want to work on pre-braille skills, or I think it's really important that he builds his tactual skills. And so I think if we lay the groundwork and we explain, like, and I mean, as you can probably tell, I just, talk nonstop. So as I'm doing stuff, I'm explaining to families why we're doing this. And then usually they come around later and then they're like, oh, I think we do need to work on that more.
I think there's a lack of a knowledge. Some of the families don't know what the goals should be. And when we ask them what are their main concerns, a lot of time it's like, I want them to move, I want them to talk. And so it's like Sammy said, it's our responsibility to sort of educate them on, well, your child is this low vision, or your child has some useful vision, and how can we incorporate some visual efficiency skills within your home environment so that your child is more visual? Or how do we incorporate the use of a push toy? Because we do think your child is going to be a cane traveler down the road. And we want to start early with getting a tool in their hands. And then I think the parents are a little bit more accepting of what the goals might be. But I do find that oftentimes the first time I'm writing a goal, they're sort of asking me, well, whatever you think is what's right. And I think, Sarah, by the time they get to school, they may know that, yeah, I really want my child to be able to walk to the bus stop. And hopefully then they can share that with their mobility specialist and the goal does become that. But I think initially I find that the parent will rely on me the first time. And then as we get to develop our relationship and they understand what I'm thinking the goals are, they, like Sammy said, they kind of express that as well.
So to kind of, when you're working with the kids in school and you're developing the goals for the IEP, do you reach out to the parents for feedback, get their thoughts? I mean, this is where Julia and I, like, you know, both of us having children with special needs, we probably know a little more than like your average parent, especially starting out. So we always joke that our kids as teachers are like, oh goodness, we have to run the IEP by them, and
Here they
like
come.
we're writing the goals for our own kiddos, but but we're not necessarily, you know, the average parent. So how do you deal with that? You know, because that's again like a different form of communication, working with the families in both of those environments and writing goals.
I set up with pre-meetings with my families at school. My district that I work in is very all about collaboration. Like we joke that all we do is have meetings. And so I have a meeting with the parents beforehand and I tell them like, this is, you know, where I'm thinking your child is proficient in grade 1. I want to move them to grade 2. This is what I'm thinking about technology. This is what I know they need for technology for next year. What are some of your thoughts? And so we have those conversations. Most of the time in the schools, parents are just like, yeah, whatever you think, that's great. Or they'll be like, oh yeah, we want them to be fully proficient in Braille by first grade, which is not possible, but besides the point. And then in the IFSPs, typically I see like the parents saying, okay, well, what do you think? Similar to like what Carol was saying, like whatever you say is best. But then it's kind of like what you said, Sarah, you turn around and you say, well, what do you want them to work on? Like yes, we know that they're going to go down this route most likely. So we have this, but what else do you want to build on visual efficiency skills? Do you want to build on, you know, XYZ? And so I think it's really just like over communication.
I think over is better.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do meet with my families as well in the schools prior to, and especially after an evaluation, since I do TVI and O&M in the school districts, I do both initial evaluations and, you know, 3-year reevals. So I do, especially at that time, reach out to the parents to see what they're thinking. But again, they're usually like, whatever you think is best for, you know, for my student, we trust you. And a lot of times I'm with my students for many, many years. So we build that relationship and they do, you know, learn to trust your judgment and feel like, you know, what you're saying, you're the professional, but I still think they're part of the team, which they are, as we all know, that they do deserve that respect of asking them to some degree what they're thinking for their child.
Yeah, I just personally, like my kids as teachers, they've always asked, you know, what are some areas that you want to see Ethan work on, or you want to see Alyssa work on? That's more of their, like the ECC, you know, maybe something in the home, or just like a life skill that's not academic driven, but something that they can include. So usually they touch base. And of course, I always get to review the goals before.
Okay, so I'm going to put my mom hat on just for a minute. No, because being in EI, she is 17 now, and I have memories as fresh as they were yesterday. But I'm going to read you a quote from somebody put in the chat. It said, the best advice I ever received was that the families are looking at today and you are looking to the future. So begin the conversation with what we can do today so that he can cross the street by himself by the time he's 12. Mm-hmm. Okay, but how do you not overwhelm families? Because I know that for me, I could only take it in little bits at a time. It was too much all at once. And, you know, I sometimes I'm like, okay, I want to like project out to where we need to be by the time they're 3. I want this done and this and this ready. Like I want those pre-Braille skills, you know, but I don't. What if families aren't ready to hear about Braille? What if they're not ready to hear about O&M? You know, how do you address that as an educator?
Go ahead.
I drop seeds. So like you kind of feel the parents out and I'll mention it. I'll say, oh, you know, I actually, when I go into the family the first day, I'll say, I work in the schools and I work in early intervention. I understand where you're going. And sometimes I'll tell you what we're working on now and I'll tell you where we want them to be. So I said, sometimes the lesson will be talking about the now and I'll hit on on the later, and that's just how my conversations go. And you can tell from that first visit if they're like, oh, later, no, I'm worried about today, then I don't touch on as much of that, and I might just drop a, oh, ask me later if you're interested in Braille and I can kind of show you this or whatever, or I can stay after the session and chat a little bit if you want to know about whatever. So then it's up to them to say, oh, you can stay a little bit later and we can talk about this. Or I mean, you have to read the parents, and you kind of know which parents are in fight or flight. And that's, I think that's the key too, is really reading the parents and seeing where they are on that spectrum of, are they really just in survival mode right now, or are they at that point where they want to make a foundation and they're moving forward.
Thank you. And I love dropping seeds. I'm going to use that again. I love
Right.
that. You're just dropping little seeds that can be planted. But yeah.
Yeah, and I was just gonna call it baby steps. You know, there's so many times when we go into a home, and Denise, as you get more experience, you know, you'll understand, like when you go into a home, if you're new to it, you kind of understand when the parent is talking to you, how they're going to move forward. I think one thing to mention is how often some of these younger families, or with newer children with diagnosed visual impairments, they love to hear about our other students. They look forward to other conversations that I might share. And I think one of the things that I always say to all my families is that I feel like I'm a really great resource. I can provide them with many different opportunities and information about things. And I have, you know, you have to be careful if you're not exactly sure how much vision the child has or what their cognitive level is. But once you get to have a better feeling, I ask other families, can I share videos? You know, if you're thinking about introducing a tool for walking, whether it be a adaptive mobility device or a pre-cane or a hula hoop, whatever it is, if I can show the family another situation that's been successful, I find that they are more willing to be accepting of that too. And I think that really helps. But you do have to be careful. And one of the things I realized when I was teaching in the schools was that so many families didn't understand that a cane doesn't have to be used at all times. Sometimes it's outside, sometimes it's only for a street crossing. So even now in early intervention, I have a little blurb that I write in my reports that sort of when I assess what tool the child needs, sometimes I say they may need this all the time or they may need it some of the time. And I make sure that I talk with the families about that and let them know that it can change. At 2 years old, I may think the child needs the cane all the time, but once that child is familiar and understands how to change surfaces and maybe they, you know, better experiences with their depth, maybe by the time they're 5 or 6, they may not need it indoors. They might just need it outside. So I always want them to know that it's always flexible as well.
Good. I'm just going through a couple of the last chats that we've had. We had one attendee comment that parents aren't always aware of the potential for their students. I think we probably see that a lot, particularly in the beginning when they're just finding out their child's blind and they're like, well, what, you know, they can't imagine the possibilities. So she said, so when I use baby steps, pushing the students when I work with them, the parents are often grateful seeing their progress, having skills that they thought they would never get to learn because they thought what they wanted them to learn would be limited because of their visual impairment. Which again, I think that's also so important as to why we should work so closely with the other team members, because I think sometimes we hear that too, you know, they're not doing this because of their vision.
All the time.
All the time.
I could have $1 for every time I hear that in a meeting.
Then you would not be here, would you, with us, Amanda? It's important for families to see what skills, or it helps families see what skills are important for them and what lies ahead. Sorry, I'm trying to like narrate, but my thing keeps jumping around. Skills and concepts for home-based routines are foundational for school as well. And
well, I want to read the comment. It says, I think this is where routine-based services can help families see what skills are important for the families. That's true. You know, you can kind of do like a little task analysis. What would it take for the child to participate in a routine. That's a really good suggestion. Thank you. I mean, I know we all use routines, that's best practice, but it's good to remember that that's how you teach the families what they need to ask about, what, you know, what they need to focus on, and what could be outcomes in the IFSP.
I had another question come up that I thought of while we were discussing kind of the differences between IEPs and IFSPs. And how do you work with the families during that transition time, and they maybe start getting a little nervous because of the time? You know, maybe in EI, they might have gotten vision once a week for 60 minutes or PT once a week for 60 minutes. And then they, you know, start talking to the schools and they find out that PT might only be 20 minutes once a week, or, you know, just the time difference can be significantly different between an IFSP and IEP. And that makes parents really, really nervous. So if you can touch on how you go about helping the families understand what's happening there.
Well,
I
the
mean,
school
one
system
thing
in Illinois, it's based, you know, that you look at eligibility, obviously, and as far as like for vision, let's say, you look at educational need and adverse effects. So based on that, you and how that child, you know, is evaluated and what their needs are for that situation drives our minutes in my school district. That's very, you know, really the process in which we go through. So I explained that I've only had 2 kids transition out. So I'm very limited. I'm sure Carol could give you a lot more. But we just break it down and we, you know, as far as what their needs are in that situation, you know, when they're entering at 3, what are their needs? What do they need to do for, you know, to transition? Are they a walker? Are they not a walker at that point? So as far as like PT would go, it's not a medical model in the school districts. It is a educational model. And what does PT, how they can support that child in the educational model from a PT standpoint. So those minutes may change. They're not going to necessarily be in there doing what might be more of a medical model that they're used to, especially if the children are being seen at a clinic for PT, which I do have 2 kids currently being seen that way. So it changes. So they have to understand the difference of how PT might be a medical model now, but it's an educational model once they turn 3. So that seems to help them understand that.
I've also talked to families too, you know, depending what type of classroom their child's getting transitioned into. You know, in one particular classroom that many of my kids get transitioned into, the teacher, you know, I explained like the classroom teacher, even though she's not a vision teacher, you know, or a hearing teacher, you know, she doesn't have the certification as specialized, she's a special ed teacher. But she will work on those goals throughout the entire day. And so a lot of times, and it takes, you know, explaining this to the families, a lot of times the kiddos are actually getting more time on that particular goal on the IEP than what's stated. It's just not coming directly from the vision teacher per se, but that goal is still getting worked on.
Right. And you were just talking about minutes being different. And I just feel like I need to mention, it's not even just that their minutes might be different because of the formulas we use, but sometimes the shortage of TVIs, depending on where they live. So I've had several families just shocked that they're going through, you know, going from a regular appointment with me, whether it be weekly or biweekly, and to a consult itinerant teacher who has to travel a long way to get to their town, you know, to see their child, unless they would choose a placement where they would have to drive, you know. So that's just, to me, that's a difficult conversation, you know, or at least a difficult transition for some families too.
I think I find that we have to be a little careful because we are servicing students in school buildings. We sort of, I mean, all 3 of us know what we think we want for our students. So when I have a child that's 3 transitioning to a different school district, and most always they are, because we rarely have them come to us when we're in the schools. If I have a child that lives in Chicago and I know he's going through the Chicago Public School CPS system, I have to be careful on what I tell the parents beforehand, because they may deliver, their service delivery may be quite different than what mine might be where I'm employed. Same with Samantha. She lived far from where she works. And so we have to be a little familiar also with who the therapist, or not the therapist, but who the maybe the vision teachers or the vision teacher coordinators are in the district where they're moving. And be careful not to overtalk service, because we want to be professional. And that is probably one of the hardest things for me. Like if I knew that a child was going into a district that wasn't one of mine, and I didn't feel like they were getting enough service, it isn't on me when they're turning 3 to challenge that school district. I have to remain professional and realize that those colleagues are doing what they're doing. And so I think that's always a little bit harder for some of us who do have such a good relationship with the parents and talk to them about everything. You have to be a little bit careful when there's that transition time.
I agree with what Carol was saying. The other thing too is in my area, there's different school districts and the vision coordinators will usually reach out to me. They're like, oh, I hear you have a kid for me. And we'll talk. But I mean, I guess lucky in one sense, my whole caseload, I've had significantly visually impaired children. So their services never decreased. They've always increased significantly because of the school model. So I've always had to talk about the opposite, where the parent might say, ooh, but I only want them having 60 minutes. I don't want them pulled out for 40 minutes a day. And then talking about, well, really, like in early intervention, we were working on these skills, but now they're going to school and they're really working on this child learning Braille. And you really do need to see the person several times a week. So I haven't had the problem of saying, oh, you're going to get your services cut or how to deal with that. Mine's always kind of saying, no, it's okay that they're getting this much. They kind of need it, and going that way.
Okay. I don't know if anyone has additional questions. Julia, do you have any more on yours? I think I ran through mine.
I was just going to talk about just more of that communication, how you talk to your families in a school setting versus how you talk to your families in EI. And I know that we had a little get together last week just about setting boundaries as well, because like Carol said, we have to be professional. We can have a really good relationship, but there's still, it's a professional relationship. So can you guys talk to that a little bit? Everybody wants to go first.
I'm just gonna call on somebody.
I feel like I'm talking too much, guys.
I know. I feel like it really depends on the family personality and our personality. There has been parents that I feel like it's so easy to talk to. The same as I have those same families in my regular school job. You get close. Like Denise said, we work with some of these kids for years and years and years. So actually the shortest amount of time for me is usually early intervention. And that's a lot harder for me because I was so used to seeing so many children for so many years during my, my years of school age teaching. So I feel like this is such a short time. And you do have to watch what you say. There's certain things, one of the things we talked about was how sometimes the family wants to talk about other things that are not related to vision. Maybe it's about another one of their children. Maybe it's about a family issue, and you have to redirect the conversations to make it so that, well, number one, maybe you don't feel like you want to hear about it because it doesn't have to do with you. Maybe it's another therapist. So many times I've had, parents tell me that they're not really sure that the physical therapist is the right person because they don't have the experience with the visually impaired children. And I think that's where the parents will speak up about things. And if I feel that they really are, not the word distraught seems a little bit, heavy, but if they're not that happy, maybe with one of their therapists, I will reach out to the service coordinator and talk about the fact that maybe we do find another therapist who has some other experiences that make this family more comfortable. There are so many factors in a home that we see when we're there for just that hour than we just see talking and walking with our students in a school building.
Mhm.
Definitely. I think the relationships that I've developed with the EI families are somewhat closer than in my short time than I have with my other school district families. So right, they'll start to talk with you, and I think you become a sounding board sometimes for them when they have frustrations or things come up, because you're in the home. And when I come into the home, I'll say, so how's your week been going? How was the holidays or whatever, just as a way to, meet and talk with them before, we get started. And that's usually when the things come up, like, oh, it was good, but, so-and-so, a sibling or a family member, another therapist, those things will come up. So yeah, it is definitely tricky. I think I tend to be just a good listener and go, shake my head or try not to commit too much, information that I think is not away from the EI situation. If it's a family member or family situation, I can, say, I feel for you. I understand how you must be feeling, that type of thing, but trying then drive it into, the child-based intervention while I'm there.
Amy, I know you have an opinion on this.
Because my families. So I'm pretty blunt. That's just who I am. And sometimes I'll say, oh, okay, like we could talk about that later. We're here for Tommy today. And let's work on what needs you have for Tommy. So I'll usually let them spin on whatever's off track for like a minute or two to show like I care about them as a person. But then I'm going to bring it back to the child because I'm there for the child. So that's where I just say, like, I'm here for Tommy. So what concerns do you have for Tommy? What did Tommy do this week? Things like that, because sometimes they need that reminder, like, yes, I'm friendly with them and we're part of that family, but I am still a professional. I am not your girlfriend over for coffee for a Saturday day. Like I'm here for your child and I'm here to make your child better. And we owe it to the child to bring the parent back on track.
Well, I'm really grateful to you three for sharing that, because I feel like that when I've had students shadow me is the biggest surprise for them. It's just the kinds of conversations that come up in a session, and that I always emphasize, I have to monitor my own responses. I am very, very careful about these conversations because we have to have some boundary, we have to be professional, but we also want our families to feel like they can trust us, they can have a good rapport with us. And I do enjoy those close relationships. So thank you guys though for sharing that, because I hope that will benefit someone who's thinking about coming into EI, so it won't be such a surprise.
Well, it's about 2:15, so unless I don't see any new questions that have popped up in the
Any of our
chat.
attendees have any other topics you'd like us to get into with, going back and forth in these dual roles? Any questions you might have if you're thinking about going into EI, or just if you want to share any other information? We've had some really helpful comments from attendees about the different service models in their different states. So this is pretty much last call for comments or questions, I would think.
I would like to thank you three, Carol, Sammy, and Denise, for, again, I know I thanked you before, but I want to thank you again for being part of our panel today, for switching hats. I really appreciate it. I know you had to take time out of your school day to come talk to us, so I appreciate it. You all always have great experiences and great knowledge to share with everyone.
We had the triple perspective of a newbie, someone who's been doing it for a few years, and someone with a lot of experience. So I hope that was, how many should you start with on your caseload? Well, we kind of talked about their number, right, before. Do you guys just want to review that? We had a question. How many should you start with on your caseload?
I started with 3. My favorite number is 3, though. There's really no rhyme or reason behind that besides that's my favorite number. So I started with 3.
Does that depend on service frequency or just that's your number?
No, when I first came out of my program, I was the first 3 service coordinators that reached out to me. I'm just going to say yes. So I actually came out with 2 weeklies and 1 biweekly student for my first 3. And then I held on to 3 for, I think it was like 7 months or so. And then I started getting hit with more students. And then I roughly keep 4 to 5 on my caseload consistently. And then the highest I've spiked was at 9. But I take in kids from like different age ranges. So there's always somebody aging out and somebody always coming in.
Yeah, I think it's something that you have to look at yourself. If you have experience in birth to 3 and you feel really like it's not going to be a change in your in what you do. I mean, if you're doing it part-time, like we have been, and doing it after school on weekends, it's just how much do you want to do? If you're not doing it part-time, I mean, what Denise and Samantha and I don't have the experience of is we are not full-time providers like Julia and Sara. So if you're, I know for the Chicago Lighthouse, for example, if you are on board and you're going to be full-time, you might have 15 or so a week. It just depends more. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. So we don't really know. But when they hire someone part-time, they're asking for 5 in a week. And so that would be a lot, I think, depending on the geography of where you're going. A lot of us live different. Again, it all depends where we live and the state you live in, what kind of area. Is it, suburban? Is it rural? That all is going to have an effect on how you schedule your clients.
I started with 1 actually, and then quite quickly I picked up 3 more. So at the most it was 4, and 4 for me was a lot because I still have my own family needs and my own school district needs that I have to, our day is not done at 3:30 and there's Braille to be done on the weekends for my students, so they have it for Monday. So it just really depends on what other things you have going on in your outside life from EI in the school district and how much time you're willing to put into it. But 4 was max for me.
Okay, we have more.
Somebody asked them, and they're curious.
Go ahead, Sara. Share yours first because yours is the biggest.
Oh, curious about full-time school caseload. I'm assuming you're asking about Julia and I?
School caseload. I thought.
Because no,
Yeah, what's your school caseload? I thought they were asking what
any of you. So I took it as Carol,
Yeah,
Denise,
you guys.
they want to know what your school caseload looks like.
I have a full caseload in my school. I cover my whole school district, so that's 6 buildings, and it ranges from 3 up until 14. We don't have a high school. Our high school students used to go to Carol's old district. But yeah, so mine's 3 to 14, and I have a full caseload at work as well.
I work in a 3 to 8th grade as well. And the way our district works for caseloads is based on the number of direct IEP minutes that we have for the, so I can have, 2 full-time Braille students who take up a lot of time, and then part-time, then I have the O&M students because the only O&M in the district. So I may only have 5 students, but then I have a counterpart who is only vision, and she picks up, the main lower number kids, lower minute kids, meaning, maybe 30 minutes a week or something. And then she has 25. So it really depends on the direct service minutes that are assigned to the students. And then of course, additional Braille time if you need it for that student.
She was asking about like full-time minutes. So I don't know if you guys want to share. I mean, typically in Illinois, don't we look at around, is it like 1,300 minutes a week is a full-time vision job?
I think I'm 1,400 a week.
Yeah, it's usually around, I would say an average of maybe somewhere between 1,100 and 1,300 maybe. It depends on where you're actually teaching and how that district looks at their services.
How much travel time you have between the students?
Good.
I'm not seeing any other questions come
No,
up.
not either. Do any of you have any last comments, bits of advice, anything you want to share? Amy says no.
Talk too much.
But you're also a good listener, which is why you're good at EI.
Mhm.
You have to be both, right?
I do, yeah. I mean, I personally love EI, and I'm glad that I got involved with it, and I don't foresee myself ever really quitting it. I think I'm gonna do what Carol did. I think I'll retire from my regular job at one point and then just stay in EI.
Yeah, it's so different depending on how you provide services. So Sara and Julia work for the state of Illinois. They provide services through a different agency. And Samantha and Denise and I are all private employees for the state of Illinois. And we do not have an employer. We're our own employer. So we're all private. And really that's the most of us in Illinois are private employees.
Mhm. That is true. And Julia and I are, yes, we just see kids in the Birth to 3 program solely. So between the both of us, we see approximately 60 to 65 families a month, just birth to 3. So we cover a large portion of the state.
Yes, you do.
I used to count my counties. I stopped counting.
I don't count counties. It's just, yeah. I always tell people like we kind of go from as far up to, as far as like the Chicago or the North providers will come down up until like the Southern providers come up. We just kind of have that whole middle of the
Middle.
state. So, all right. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I don't know if we should at this point hand it back over to Elia and Catherine. They probably have a closing code.
Yes. Yes. Thank you all for, presenting all that awesome information. I know I learned a lot just from being from Texas and how different it is in all these different places. It's always interesting to learn that. And listening to you all just made me miss working with the families and babies that much more. I do agree that it's a special job, and it just, there's nothing like it in the world. So thank you guys for doing what you do and sharing all that expertise.